Thank you very much, Wissam, and thank you to the organizers of this conference for giving me a few minutes to speak. To introduce myself, my name is Jasmine. I grew up in Saudi Arabia, so I was born and raised there. Though I am not Saudi, I'm actually Palestinian, so I've got that refugee story mixed in as well. And just to add a little bit of complication, I inherited the American passport from my father, who was, became an American. It's a long story. We'll talk later. But, I decided when I was 18 years old that I wanted to go to the United States to study for my bachelor's degree, and that's where the whole questioning of my faith started upon entering the United States. I am now an ex-Muslim, so I am an atheist, and I don't necessarily have a definitive moment or story or kind of point where I can say, oh, this is where I stopped believing, but I was very much a believer in the truth of Islam, and it rang true for me, and I definitely had a lot of beliefs that I'm a little bit ashamed of now that I'm an atheist, and so I'm happy that I've been able to shed that, but I want to approach kind of the issue of what we're supposed to do with this kind of diversity that exists in Muslimish, because it's wonderful for me to see sort of religious Muslims coming together with ex-Muslims. I've never really seen that before, to be honest, and so I'm very happy to be seeing it. But I think that there's been a question of is it okay to sanction progressive Islam, or should we be, abandoning all religion? And that's something I want to speak to you about a little bit today. What I'm going to sort of try to lay out is that I don't think there's one answer, and I think you all already know that there are diverse paths towards achieving whatever goals we have in common. And so I'm going to speak to that, but first I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I do. So I am the additional representative to the United Nations for the Center for Inquiry. The main representative is Michael Dodora. I'm sure some of you know him. He's a great guy. So CFI is a nonprofit. We advocate for science, reason, and secular values in the United States and at the United Nations, as well as kind of abroad, and in trying to raise awareness, putting out statements through different methods. And my particular role is just limited to the United Nations. But above all, we advocate for science, reason, and secular values, but we also advocate for ending the privileged status religion holds. So we don't necessarily say we don't want any religion to be existing in the world, because I think that's a little bit naive to say. But we definitely disagree with this privileged status religion has. Within the United States, I think the focus has been for us on Christianity more than anything. I don't think Islam is so much of an issue. When I say that, I mean issues of birth control and same-sex marriage and abortion. The focus is really, on the Christian elements that are within the United States. But when it comes to the UN, it is definitely Islam that's talked about. And what we try to focus on, so either countries that are Muslim or issues that seem to be rooted in Islam. And so in our approach to the United Nations, I think what's important here is that we are less concerned with hearts and minds and opinion changing. We are more focused on human rights, actually. And so that's kind of a good segue to what Zahar Shahzad was saying before about what's the common message amongst Muslims and non-Muslims and progressive Muslims is rights, right? It's laws and things like that. And so that's what we try to focus on, at least at the United Nations. And so we do so through attending conferences, like I mentioned. Michael attends regularly the Human Rights Council in Geneva. He's actually there right now in Geneva. I'm not sure for which conference, but he's there. And I usually attend the ones related to women's rights. So the Commission on the Status of Women is the big one for me. And of course, we have a big representation at the United Nations Committee on the Freedom of Religion or Belief. And like I said, Michael, who's the president of that organization, he's also part of CFI, but I'm the CFI representative there too. So that's a little bit of background about me and what I do and what CFI does. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the observations I'm seeing in the United Nations in terms of some of the issues we talked about today. So with regards to ISIS, violence propagated within, Islamic context. This is what I'm observing, and I think it's important for you guys to know how people are approaching the issues at the United Nations. And so what I see is, number one, there's a purely secular approach. So people want to talk about the issues of ISIS, etc., through economic or political means only. So this is happening because people are poor. This is happening because there are wars going on, and that's all they want to say, and they want to disregard anything else. So that's a big framing of the conversation. The second way is definitely through progressive Muslim voices that are saying, you know, what we should do is we should reach out to imams and get them to go out and give progressive fatwas, and that's how we're going to change the world. So there's that voice is very strong too, as well as there are the people out there that say, you know, these people that are committing acts of violence and atrocity, those people aren't Muslims, so this is not a Muslim issue, let's just move on. So that's sort of, being a person who has been in this position for less than a year. I walked in the UN and I was like, wow, seems like everybody's in a different place and we're not really talking to each other, and it was a little bit concerning. But I've come to understand that this is somewhat of a good thing, and I'll explain to you what I mean. The second overall observation I've had is that there's a little bit of what Bill Maher calls the soft bigotry of low expectations, meaning it's okay for Muslims to do a certain thing, and that's not necessarily criticized, but if a white person does it, or if a Christian person does it, that's like, people are more willing to criticize that particular act. And so that's something that's very prevalent too, is that, there's a lot of, we don't want to criticize a minority, there's a lot of that. And so for me, hearing the conversation